From our Fox Business Studios in New York, here again is Gerri Willis.
Homeland Secretary Napolitano giving travelers advice on the first weekend since the sequester. Listen to this.
If you're traveling, get to the airport earlier than you otherwise would. There's only so much we can do with personnel, and please don't yell at the customs officers or the TSA officers. They are not responsible for sequester.
Wow, that's so preachy. Okay, the problem with her advice is that there are no delays so far. With more on this, Gretchen Hamel, Director for Public Notice, Katie Pavlich, Townhall.com Senior Editor, and Hadley Heath right here on set with me. She's from the Independent Women's Forum. Hadley, I'll start with you. What do you make of that?
Well, we would have a 30 days notice if there were going to be major furloughs in the FAA or in the TSA. So let's give it time. But I say let's give the sequester a lot of time, because in the long run, what we're actually going to see is when we reduce the size and scope of government, we're going to have growth here at home, and we're going to have growth in D.C.
Well, let's talk about some of these delays. Miami International Airport, TSA officers are staffed normally. We're not expecting delays. Not aware of delays, the Boston Logan International. Philadelphia International Airport, everything is operating normally. As of now, no impact due to sequestration. Gretchen, I think we were sold a bill of goods here.
Yeah, I think we were sold a bill of goods, and even the Washington Post came out this weekend calling out some of the administration's claims that this pre-sequester posturing wasn't backed up by a lot of fact, and we're kind of seeing some real-life examples that this isn't as bad as people make it seem. It's kind of like waking up the morning after, 2000. It's Y2K.
I know. What? There was Y2K? I had no idea.
Yeah.
Katie, I'm going to turn to you. Last week, the Education Secretary Arne Duncan said that teachers were going to be fired, pink slips were going out. Then he had to walk it back. He's saying that today, language is important. No kidding, because if you don't make it right, people think you're lying. Katie, what did you make of the Arne Duncan fiasco? Because, here's yet another part of the president's cabinet who is being tested for veracity, I guess you'd have to say.
Well, a couple things. First of all, we've shown over the past decades that the Department of Education really hasn't done much to increase test scores, which was what their whole point was. Not to mention teacher funding usually comes from a state level and is a local problem. And he had to walk the comment back because teachers aren't getting their pink slips. It's not happening like they said it would. And I want to point out real quickly, too, Janet Napolitano, and go back to her, because she said that there were long lines at the airports over the weekend. Well, I was at the airport. I was at LAX, and it actually went a lot faster than usual. So I think that TSA really stood for thousands standing around, and that the TSA is actually operating more efficiently now.
Well, it's funny, because I think Hadley is probably right. At some point, we might see some changes, but certainly not right away. You guys are such a great panel. We can go to all kinds of topics. And I want to go to foreign aid to Egypt for just a second, because big conversation over the weekend here. We're now giving more money to Egypt. The latest request, $250 million. Undoubtedly, we will pony this money up at a time we are $16 trillion in debt. Hadley, what do you make of this?
Well, it's unbelievable, Gerri. It's just mind-blowing to think that we'd be handing out $250 million when we have $16 trillion in national debt here at home. $6 trillion of that added during the Obama administration. So when you're in a rut, when you have a lot of personal debt, we understand you don't go out making loans or giving grants to your friends. And we're not even sure that these guys are our friends.
Well, I mean, that's to the bigger point here, Gretchen. I mean, what do we know about the Muslim Brotherhood is not positive. Everything that seems to be their priority is not ours. Should we be pulling this money?
Well, and you bring up priorities, and that's exactly why we have sequester. That's why sequester is going into effect, is because we were unable to establish what our priorities were and make those cuts that needed to be made. And that this right here is another example. Washington is always going to find another dollar to spend, and that's why we need things like sequester in order to make these cuts go into effect.
Okay, on to my favorite story of the weekend. And this is Dennis Rodman. He goes to North Korea. I can't even begin to express my shock that he was on one of the Sunday morning shows. Here's what he said about his trip.
I sat with him for 2 days, and the one thing he asked me to give Obama something to say and do one thing. He wants Obama to do one thing: call him.
He wants a call from President Obama?
That's right. He told me that. He said, if you can, Dennis, I don't want to do war.
I'm telling you. So the man he's describing, obviously, is the North Korean president, Kim Jong-un. You know, Katie, to you, you saw this. Why are we covering this? Why is serious media, you know, examining this, weighing this, thinking about what the impacts might be?
Well, I watched an interview today, actually, that was quite alarming in that it said that Dennis Rodman got closer to the dictator of North Korea than any CIA operative ever has. So I'm going to go with the silver lining here and say that in this case, culture is trumping politics, and maybe it can help a little, but Dennis Rodman shouldn't be trusted with foreign policy.
Hadley.
I'm glad that the dictator of North Korea likes basketball. I'm glad that that's something we can have in common. I love basketball too, but I'm not a fan of dictatorships, and I'm not a fan of human rights violations. And some of those disagreements are much deeper, much more important than the interest that we can have in common.
And Gretch, what about the nuclear problem? I mean, for goodness sakes, at the end of the day, this is just completely out of control. Dennis Rodman, what does it come to that Dennis Rodman is our international ambassador?
I mean, I really don't see why you have a problem with this, Gerri. I mean, I don't. I mean, I would have picked Kim Kardashian, but again, it's knowing a messenger and sending the right message.
All right, well, guys, thanks for coming on tonight. Great stuff. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks, Gerri.
Thank you. Thank you.
When we come back, think you've been racking up points at your favorite hotels?